Oh, great Magic 8 Ball. Is it a good idea to make this YouTube video? Outlook good.
Hello, friends. Oh, I know what you're thinking. Reverend Eric is making videos now. Well, not by choice. I'm being coerced by a shadowy cabal of nefarious wizards. Today, I would like to explore an important question. Why does divination work? This is not a video about convincing skeptics that divination does work. Let's just take that as a fact. Obviously, as a professional tarot reader, I've got some skin in the game of assuming that divination works, so I'm not going to deny that I'm biased. So divination works, but why? And how? Through over 30 years of tarot experience, 10 years of blogging about tarot, 5 years of running the Arnemancy podcast, and helping to moderate the Hermetic House of Life Discord, I have met dozens, if not hundreds, of diviners. They work with tarot, runes, geomancy, astrology, along with other systems and techniques too numerous to list. And they all know that divination works. Is it because we all live in some giant interconnected clockwork universe? Is it some Aristotelian chain of being and cause and effect stretching back to a prime mover? Is it because a tyrannical god manipulates us all with invisible tendrils of fate? Is it? I certainly have some ideas. But because I'm so used to podcasting, I thought it would be more fun to pester one of my very intelligent friends and ask him. So I called up Trey Henry, who, when he is not on a boat, sometimes lives in a magical cabin on a mysterious island, just like a nefarious wizard. And I asked him.
So the question that I really have to ask you today is divination. Why the heck does it work?
Yeah, so this is it's a really it's an interesting question, and I think I'm gonna have my answer, which is hopefully useful to people, but also I want to acknowledge out of the gate that the answer to this question is really sort of a personal journey. I think in the past I can't remember what the venue was, but you put out this question about like, how do you define magic? Like, how do you define sorcery? Like, just categorically, and going through that process of like trying to define that for yourself, even though your definition will be imperfect, is a worthwhile thing to do. But anyway, to answer the question, my answer for why is everything is interconnected. Everything is sort of interwoven in this beautiful, complex tapestry, which even after 300,000 years of human interaction, for as long as we know that Homo sapiens have been around, is still kind of opaque. It's very rich and complex and beautiful, but also like impossible to know and understand in its totality. And so in the same way that in a laboratory, you can sort of like isolate maybe like a particular chemical reaction, and then from that one isolated instance, kind of understand something about the broader chemical reactions of other things, or like how that chemical reaction might happen in the wild, taking into account that what happens in the lab is never exactly what happens in the wild, but it does give you something. And so divination, like, why does it work? It works because understanding something about one part of that tapestry tells you something about the tapestry itself. And so that's kind of like my answer from just a very high level.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's sort of like everything being all interconnected and interwoven like that is sort of like a soup, like a nicely made soup prepared by the best soup chef.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I like the fabric metaphor because
fabric metaphor. So everything's sort of woven together like
right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because if you the thing I like about that metaphor is that if you pull on, like, if you imagine a spider web and you like you put any pressure on any part of the spider web, like everything flexes, everything moves, it's all interconnected. And so this is the way that sort of like you can imagine that divination is kind of like pulling on a part of the web and then seeing what happens. And so in that way, and I'm explicitly going for an interactive metaphor because you know me, I believe that divination is more than a read operation. I think it's an
also
interaction.
a writing
I don't.
operation. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not just about like asking a question, getting an answer. It's an interaction with the forces of creation, let's say. So I like that. I like that fabric metaphor. But like if you think about astrology, like in astrology. One of the things that I encourage people who might be hung up on the idea that like, well, how can it be that like these outer planets might like have some kind of direct physical influence on events on Earth or whatever? That's a complicated question, by the way, and actually we do know that happens. But anyway, but if you're hung up on that, like one way to think about it is just that there's movement and there's cycles and there's sort of these if you believe that all things are interconnected, which I think is a good starting belief, then the position of the planets happens because of the same cause as events on Earth. It's an effect which has a similar cause. And so like in the same way that your watch doesn't control time, it does though tell you the time so you know when to get up and when to go to work and when to pick up the kids from daycare and all that kind of stuff. And so that it's understanding how these things interrelate and less like this thing causes this thing.
Okay.
So I think it's like, yeah, it's an interrelated web that when you can kind of like put the loop on one part of it and interact with one part of it, you get a little bit of a sense of like how the other things are connected. And if you look at the history of divination, there's plenty of examples of people like, using the flight of birds, using the cracks in a turtle shell that's been put into a fire, and all of these things. And you might say, well, why is it that like that would have any like impact on whether or not like you should go to war, for example, or whatever. And well, then at some level, you have to kind of say like all of these things are interconnected. So.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at. I'm wondering, though, what about... So some forms of divination involve a lot of randomness, right? So, like, throwing sticks for geomancy or rolling dice or shuffling a deck of cards. And those sorts of divination try to, randomize stuff as much as possible. While other forms of divination involve like observation of the natural world where the diviner doesn't necessarily have any sort of like direct input on whatever variation there might be, such as augury, where you're observing birds, or, the big one, astrology, where it's hard to imagine that any human down here has a whole lot of say over what the heavenly bodies are doing when they're moving along. Do these different types of approaches to divination affect the types of things you can divine?
Okay, let's talk about randomness, because this is a topic that I really, really I'm as you know, I'm very interested in, I'm very focused on, and I want to flip the narrative of randomness for most people, because we can talk about sort of like spirit daimon versus fortune, or fate versus free will as kind of like a separate topic. Let's just put that on the shelf for the moment. I'm going to make the argument that randomness is the carrier signal which creation's or is the carrier wave which creation's signal is carried on. There is not, like, whether or not you believe that it's actually possible to achieve random, which we don't know actually, because answering that question is the same as we've talked about in the podcast before. Like, answering the question of is it possible to actually have random is the same as is it possible to have free will.
Yeah.
But getting, as a practitioner, if you're working with divination, which you should be, getting really close to this idea of randomness as the actual beating heart of the mystery, I think is going to get you really close. Like I hear a lot with cartomancers or tarot practitioners and things like this, that like the cards have a life of their own. The cards, like the right cards come up, and I like have that sensation of like when things click into place, which I do too, right? And I think to some extent, this is actually a little bit of a unexamined pushback on the idea that it's random, because we believe that randomness is valuelessness, right? Like that if something is random, like that it is inherently has no value. Because how can something that's random tell us whether or not to go to war or whatever? And my point is that in without saying there is no free will, because I don't believe that either. I believe that it is a commingling of fate and free will. Their randomness is what makes it work. Like it is like, particularly if you're talking about these forms of divination that like where you're shoveling out cards, or you're lot based divination systems. Astrology is a little bit of a unique thing because it is regular and predictable. But I would argue that if you look at horary as a tradition, but there's this wonderful book on horary, and it's basically like taking Lily's Christian astrology and kind of modernizing it for modern practitioners. But it's very much like it's essentially that. And one of the observations that the author makes is that on the phone when taking a client, that it will sometimes appear as though the client is like hemming and hawing and like asking weird questions and like not getting to the point. And the author's observation over time is that it's almost like they're trying to find the right moment for sharing it with the practitioner, so that the practitioner then is like, okay, now I'm casting the horary chart. So
it's those little micro delays and
right,
which affect when the chart is cast, and that can
exactly so
add an element of randomness.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's this like, or I think even just like with the natal chart as well. It's like you don't decide as the mother giving birth when you're going to be able to give birth, and that's why like is that random? I don't know. But that's why the natal chart is important and works. And so like this is also an interesting thing about electional astrology, where you're taking the pattern and saying like, okay, now I'm going to actually pick, which is a whole separate topic. But I think when it comes to randomness and divination, I think as a practitioner, like leaning in on this idea that randomness is how it works. Like randomness is the closer you get to this idea of randomness. And this is also why I, as a practitioner,
I like this a lot.
This is also why I really discourage people from using, and this is going to be possibly an unpopular sort of topic, but using like daily draw apps and things like this, where the phone is where something is interacting with randomness without your direct input to it. And so, so for example, this is why like Mosaic, which is a digital divination tool that Heather Freeman and I created, this is why it has a sort of physics-based shuffling where you interact with the software to enact a shuffling that's very much like shuffling tiles or something like that on a board. And that's very intentional, because you are then the source of the randomness. And I think that's important. I think there is some interaction of the practitioner with the randomness, and that sense that you get when, I think a lot of practitioners will attest to this. Like I describe it as kind of like the feeling of a key being put into a lock, and then that moment when like the lock can turn, like the tumbler is all like aligned. like that's what it feels like to me. I'll be shuffling, or I'll be, you know, like drawing dots on a paper for geomancy or whatever, and I get that sense that like, okay, we're good. That is you interacting with randomness in a really deep and rich and interesting way, and then you can kind of like you can open that experience up more, even to then start to talk about how you interact with that, and divination as a right operation and things like this, which I've talked about before.
Yeah. And that was a fascinating conversation we had on the podcast. I'll make sure that there's a link to that. Am I supposed to do this pointing thing down below?
Like and subscribe, ring that bell.
Whoa. Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. The idea of the practitioner, the diviner, and the querent both being involved in kind of like seeding the randomness of the reading is really fascinating. And I had this thought while you were talking, like augury, you know, divination by birds has been something that has been really curious to me, because it seems to me that like bird watchers, people who love birds, might have a very strange time interacting with augury, because they're already going to know bird patterns, bird behavior, where birds are going to be. So I'm not really sure. You know what? I'm going to experiment with this and find out if bird watching makes one a better augur or a worse augur.
Yeah, I think
maybe that could be a YouTube video.
Yeah, so my observation, I bet you that the further down that rabbit hole you go, the more the mystery will unfold, and also present you with another layer and another layer and another layer.
Yeah.
That seems to be the.
I think we're gonna have to find out.
Yeah. I'm curious about what your observations are about that. My experience with different systems and like really digging into them is that the further you go, if it's good, like if it's super good and solid. Also, this is a message out there to practitioners who are interested in creating their own systems of divination. One of the hallmarks of the system being super solid and good is that you can peel a layer and then peel another layer and then peel another layer, and you're like, oh, it's interconnected in this way, it relates to these other things in this way. Like there's a depth there that like doesn't stop at like one or two levels. I get at some point I want to like I'm very interested in this topic of the creation of bespoke divination systems, which I think has a long and glorious tradition for practitioners.
Does, yeah.
And I think it's a really valuable and worthwhile thing to do that tells you a lot in that same context of like being able to look at a small part of something and then understand the bigger thing of it. Like if you want to know more about divination, make a divination system. It will teach you a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. All right, now I have a question that I want you to answer in 30 seconds or less.
It's like you don't know me.
I know. Can divination tell the future?
Yeah. Okay. So this is okay. When we put the conversation about
the timers.
Okay, I'm going. Fate and free will.
Okay.
We put that on the shelf. I'm going to take it back off the shelf.
Okay.
My answer to this is kinda. Sorta.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. Yeah.
Because the metaphor. I'll go to a nautical metaphor, of course.
All right.
The divination can tell you what river you're on, what the shape of your boat is, the boat's capabilities, maybe where the shore is, maybe where the rocks are, things like that. But the guidance of the boat is your hand on the tiller or your hand on the wheel, right? And so it's both of these things. And so while I think if you're looking for divination to tell you very exact specifics about the future, it might be able to do that, but it will really depend on the circumstance. I think it's better to kind of look at it as like this way of sort of navigating or understanding what you're navigating in and how you're navigating it.
Oh, that is an excellent answer.
Did I get it in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think, it was like a stretched 30.
Okay, I have a bonus thing on this exact topic.
Okay.
I have this technique, which is basically exactly this, and it's a tarot technique. But I think you could actually do this with almost any card-based divination system. So in astrology, you know, we have the lot of fortune and the lot of spirit, which are literally the points in the chart that are sort of reflecting this kind of like what fortune has bestowed upon you, the general shape of things, the river you're on, the boat you're in, etc., and what you can do about it. You know, sort of your hand on the tiller, your hand on the wheel. You can lean into this by whatever tarot deck you're using. Use two. I actually mark one of them with the symbol of the part of fortune and one of them with the symbol of the part of spirit, which look like a circle with an X through it for fortune and then a circle with a straight line through it for spirit. And then whatever layout you're using, lay it out twice, one card from each deck. So, you know, like let's say that you're just using like a simple 3-card spread, like past, present, future, let's say. So you would lay out 3 cards that are from the fortune deck and then 3 cards that are from the spirit deck. And then when you look at them, you now have this extra layer of how you can basically interpret each of those cards. Is the cards that are on the fortune layer are sort of like the unchanging, sort of like, this is the game board, you know, these are the pieces. This is the stuff that is sort of like out of your control in most cases, and that is just kind of like the context that you're operating in. And then the other card is sort of like how you can interact with it, what you can do about it. And I've found this to be very useful. I think it really gives you a lot without being overwhelming, because it's kind of like already sort of baked into how we think about divination. And I also think that doing this sort of like having both of these things represented, I think also can help you sort of like have a more innate understanding of that interplay between fate and free will, which I think our ancestors got a lot more right than we do in the modern era. I think we have this very dualistic sort of approach to it, which I don't think is right.
Well, that sounds like another interesting experiment. I will definitely try that out. Okay, now finally, I would like you to tell us about the best astrology software in the world and how our viewers can follow along with your progress on creating it.
Thanks for the plug. For anybody who doesn't know, I created software called Urania, which is freely available and is kind of based on electional astrology, and GeoRatio for geomancy and a number of other things. I am now working on, with my co-founder, a astrology software called Cosmic, which is professional astrology software designed for practitioners. So if you are a professional astrologer, if you're taking clients, that sort of thing, like you're the person that we're targeting. And we're targeting horary, we're targeting electional, natal, and mundane, and we're really like the astrological tradition, modern astrology, allowing you to kind of really move between these worlds easily. And so it's a work in progress. We are not done. We are far from done, actually. It's a very hard problem. But we're working diligently at it. And you can find us on YouTube at Cosmic Plumbing, Plumbing, which is our sort of company name is Cosmic Plumbing. And we do every week we do video updates of sort of where we're at with the software. So.
Well, great. I will make sure that is easy for viewers to find because I love watching your updates, and I think more people should do it.